Welcome, Dr. Gail Gazelle. May I call you Gail?
Of course.
Okay, great. Please tell me about yourself and the work that you do to improve the lot of us physicians and other health professionals.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to meet you. Really wonderful to be here today. I'm a practicing hospice physician. That's why I went to medical school, actually, to work in end-of-life care. And about 10 years ago, as we were finding out more about burnout, I decided to go back and do kind of a miniature training compared to our medical training, which was training as an executive coach. And I've worked as an executive coach since 2010, coaching approximately 400 physicians and physician leaders. And people come to me in all kinds of, I would say, levels of anguish. Perhaps they're experiencing burnout. Perhaps they want to take their leadership to a new level. Perhaps they're struggling with conflict management in all the conflicts that they face. Certainly, many people come with the anguish of inadequate work-life balance and all the feelings that arise around that. And my job as a coach is to help people figure out the way forward, not by telling them what to do, but by hopefully showing them what's in their best interest to do, different ways of kind of conceptualizing problems, figuring out areas that they're stuck. It's all about deepening self-awareness and forwarding action. So it gives me tremendous pleasure to help colleagues locally and nationally really figure out a lot of the skills that they didn't get in medical school that make the difference when you're trying to run the marathon of a medical career.
And that's so neat, Gail, because you come from the background of being a physician and practicing as a physician, so you understand exactly what we're going through. Can you help me just decipher the difference a little bit between, let's say, a mentor, a coach, and a therapist? Because a little bit of what you say that you're doing as a coach sounds a mix of all three, maybe.
Sure. Yeah, so we've all had mentors in our careers, and they, in many ways, shepherd us forward. They share knowledge, they support us in various ways, and they're very focused on kind of giving us the skills, often clinical skills, in addition to non-clinical skills, that they want to impart to us, that they believe are important. A therapist, many of us have had therapy, and it's wonderful. And therapy is really a lot about telling the story of our life and spending a lot of time in the past. Change is optional in therapy. Sometimes people change, sometimes people don't. Sometimes they, we've all seen the Woody Allen movies. They tell the story over and over and over and don't change. And coaching is a model of wellness that's all about self-efficacy. So in contradistinction to the mentorship, we're not telling people what to do. We're not saying this is the agenda and this is the information you need to know. We're really picking up on the client's agenda and what it is that they want to move forward on. And then, differentiated from therapy, the focus in coaching is on the present and the future. The past is important in terms of how it impacts us here in the present, how it motivates us, how it holds us back, how it shapes our view of ourselves and the world. But the emphasis in coaching is always about moving forward towards results. It's all about action. If you're not moving forward, it's not working.
Okay. And today we're talking about mindful practice. So we've been hearing through the ether of social media, this word mindfulness. It's cropping up, and I'll be frank, it didn't come up once in all of my medical training. And now all of a sudden I'm hearing it in these last few years. What is mindfulness, and what is specifically mindful practice?
So I'll go with a couple of definitions of mindfulness, because you're right, there's so much out there in the ether, as you say, and the word is used in a lot of different ways. One definition comes to us from Jon Kabat-Zinn, who was a researcher at UMass Memorial and really has been credited with bringing mindfulness into North American culture. And he describes mindfulness as paying attention in a very specific way, on purpose, without judgment, and with an awareness of what's going on in the present moment. Ryan Nemiak, who is a PhD positive psychologist and also the founder of mindfulness-based strengths practice, defines mindfulness a little bit differently and also talks about the quality of attention and awareness. And he deviates a little bit and talks about the importance of being aware with curiosity, openness, and acceptance. And then the last part of that definition that isn't really covered by those two comes to us by two very wise modern-day Buddhist psychologists, Tara Brach and Jack Kornfield, who add to those definitions by really stressing the importance of compassion, both for one's circumstances, the people one interacts with, and then certainly for oneself. So all of this is very applicable to the practice of medicine. And we now have over half a dozen studies looking at the benefits of mindfulness specifically for physician burnout. So that information in the setting of not a lot of studies about what the heck to do about this major epidemic that we're having on burnout really makes it important for us to think about how do we practice in a more mindful way. And the piece of that, the whole idea of the present moment, can seem very woo-woo to a lot of physicians. What is that? And just to unpack it, the present moment is basically the reality of what's in front of us. The present moment right now. I'm talking to you. I'm not thinking about the person who nearly cut me off in my car as I was driving here, or what worries about later on, picking up my child, for example. And the present moment can sometimes be thought of as well as the space between what's already happened and what's next. So there are many benefits around burnout, and certainly we can talk about some of the other benefits of mindfulness in the very harried, complex, and challenging circumstances that physicians find themselves in.
And I think that's the crux of it, Gail, is in that busyness of the clinic day, what is the benefit of taking that extra moment to observe what is happening in the present, as we were just discussing, and being mindful, and then trusting that that has benefit for the long term?
I think there are a number of benefits, and when we're burnt out in particular, which, as you know, 40 to 60% of American physicians, very large numbers, it's hard for us to stay focused on what's in front of us. For example, I was coaching an emergency physician today who experiences a huge amount of dread before she goes in for her shifts. Not uncommon. Many physicians have Sunday night dread, you know, for the Monday office. And part of that dread was, I'm overwhelmed, I'm miserable, I can't face another shift, the opioid epidemic is bearing down on me, these people don't belong in my emergency room, it's miserable, I can't stand it, I don't know how I'm going to cope. So there's a lot bundled in there, but I think most physicians can kind of relate to that cascade of all of those negative thoughts that we spiral into. And as opposed to, I'm experiencing a lot of emotion right now. And right here, in my present moment, right in front of me, actually things are okay. I'm at home, I'm with my spouse, I haven't gone into my shift yet. And so by focusing, by kind of dialing back to what's going on right now, it's often nowhere near as bad as we've made it out to be in our mind.
Perhaps sort of like a reality check, it sounds like.
I think focusing on the present moment is really all about reality. It's about what's going on in front of you right now. Where can you focus your attention? And one of the, I would say, the benefits of mindfulness has to do with the ability that we gain to focus our attention where we want to focus it. So I'm sure we'll talk more about meditation, but meditation, quite simply, is having a focal point, typically the breath, but for physicians it can be our pulse as well, and noticing that our mind is developing thoughts, perfectly normal, that's what the mind does, and practicing shifting our attention over and over and over from those thoughts that distract us back to the focal point. Again, typically the breath. So it's a practice of constantly deciding, this is where my attention is going to be. So when you think about translating that into our practice and mindful practice, what could be better than to actually be able to tune out all those distractions, the MA coming to the door, the lab tests that we have to chase down, the pager going off, the waiting room that we're thinking about with another 5 patients you know, that we're running late for. What could really be better than to harness all of our energy into focusing our attention where we want to?
Several of the things that you just said, I wish I could just keep it all in my mind to refer back to, but I wanted to point out one of the homework assignments that I've been working on with Les is to, as part of self-care, take a moment out of the day and actually take a lunch break. It actually was a novel idea for me initially because, in fact, since I started working as a primary care physician, I haven't had one lunch that wasn't in front of my computer in a business meeting or just standing on the go. And for the first time last week, I went outside, and Les and I reflected on that, and I just said my thoughts were just wandering all over the place. And it really resonated with me what you said just now, Gail, about how do we refocus that attention to what I want to be thinking about, to what I want to be focused on. And part of that, a couple questions to follow up. One, with the practice of meditation, like you were saying, or sort of harnessing and focusing in on what we want to focus on, does it get easier? And number two, how do we focus but also do the multitasking that is part of our everyday? You know, the MA will knock at my door, and I will need to interrupt that clinic appointment with a patient to address an EKG that I have to read. How do I switch my attention back and forth or respond to a code blue if it was in the hospital, or we have codes in clinic as well, and then get back to right where I was with the patient?
Obviously a challenge in a busy day in office practice in which there are many challenges. So your first question, does it get easier? Meditation is typically a lifelong practice, so it's not that easy to just snap yourself back. But like going to the gym and developing musculature or developing your cardiovascular endurance, with practice, one can learn how to shift one's attention. It's not about, oh, just focus here, you know, don't worry about that. You would never hear those words from me, certainly as a coach. It's about kind of developing that muscle, that skill. And then there's so many other parts of mindfulness that maybe I'll just kind of share some of those in terms of your second question and multitasking, which of course it's hard not to do to get through a busy day. Another aspect of mindfulness is what's called critical curiosity. So getting curious about lots of different things, but in particular, getting curious about one's own thought processes. So when we're burnt out, and I keep referring back to that because it is such a colossal problem in practice, when we're burnt out, we develop almost a type of tunnel vision. We see things in one way, and that way is often highly negative, but it's a bit distorted. So, for example, somebody in a primary care setting, you know, maybe has 20 patients to get through in the day, then has to stay and do all the documentation. And you might find yourself as a primary care doctor getting into a thought process of, you know, this is really miserable. I don't really know how I'm going to make it through the day. And I don't even think I can stay in the practice of medicine. I would not recommend this to my worst enemy, let alone my children or friends. And I don't really know how I'm going to make it. And this is really bad. And you know what? They're out to get me too. They don't see my value. They don't see how hard I'm working. You know, this is sort of getting into a lot of different thoughts
Gail,
here.
wait a second. Are you reading my mind? I looked at Les because that actually came up. I have a young daughter. She's 4 years old. And just to give you a little background, in that she, you know, one day came home, she's wanted to be all sorts of things. You know, I want to be a firefighter, mommy. I want to be the waitress who serves us this yummy spaghetti and meatball. I want to do this and that. And one day she came home and she said, Mommy, I want to be a doctor like you and Daddy. And my husband and I literally, we looked at each other and we were like, oh, honey, you can be anything you want. Secretly inside, we were like, please, dear Lord, do not become a doctor. And that was really resonated with what you said just now.
Yeah, I think a lot of physicians feel that way. And certainly the pressures are mighty, and the pressures do not show any evidence of letting up. So there's real concern about the sustainability of practice, no question about that. What we're talking about in terms of harnessing the benefits of mindfulness, a little bit, we go down these spirals in terms of our thinking. So when I think about resilience, I think about energy conservation. Okay, so The macro level is, developing efficiency. A lot of physicians call me as a coach, how can I become more efficient? Because if I can only become more efficient, if I can only kind of squeeze more lemonade out of the lemons in myself and my practice, then I'd get home at least by 8 p.m., if not, staying in the office till 10. And maybe it would be more manageable. So that's one kind of energy conservation, is becoming more efficient outwardly. We waste a lot of energy in our thought processes. And that's the part that I think mindfulness can really help us with, because our thoughts tend to run wild.
Yes.
And we tend, particularly as physicians, to believe that our thoughts are factual. Now, some of our thoughts are factual, of course, but we don't always discern, is that thought actually fake news? Is that thought potentially partially true, but not completely true? So again, combining that with the tunnel vision, we find ourselves getting into, we're sitting with a patient, and yet we're angry about all the demands on our time.
Yeah.
Our pager's going off. Again, there are many things that are pressing on us. And we get into a thought process that takes us down some fairly dark alleys about the sustainability, even for ourselves. And if we can question those thoughts and again, sort of almost take refuge in the present moment when things are typically not as bad as our ruminations about the past and our worries about the future tell us. In that present moment, we're actually breathing. We're actually still perhaps conversing with somebody in a satisfying way. So let me give you another example of it. A lot of physicians call me kind of with the following, I would say the following line, which is, it's miserable, Gail. I can't go on. Many physicians call me who are very burnt out, and they'll say something like, Gail, I'm not accomplishing anything. There is no meaning in my day. Why should I go on? Why should I get out of bed? And I'll say to them, I understand. I can really hear how much pain you're in. Let's just do a little scan over your week. If you could think about the blur of patients that you've seen, let's say since Monday morning, and just do a little scan. And I want you to particularly focus on any bright spots that you have, with patients in particular.
Yeah.
Time after time, physicians will say, oh, that's right, Mrs. Jones on Monday, well, I didn't really do much for her, but, she seemed appreciative. She actually gave me a big hug when she left. And, Mr. Dunbar, I wish there was more that I could do for his CHF or whatever, his cirrhosis, whatever the problem is. But, I think I did make a little bit of a difference, even though I wish I could really cure him, and I can't. And all of a sudden, I've had physicians break into tears, because all of a sudden they realize that there has been a lot of meaning, but in that tunnel vision and in that getting locked into a certain thought process about how miserable things are, we can miss out on what's actually in front of us. And I think it's really important for us to sustain ourselves in practice, to notice every little bit of meaning that there is, to be able to have kind of a both and perspective that mindfulness can also bring us, which is that, yes, the practice of medicine is very challenging. There's no question about it. Yes, the days are long. Yes, they're exacting a lot from me. And yes, I also have a lot of satisfaction that I can draw upon. Because if we don't kind of take those daily doses of meaning and satisfaction, there's no way we'll be able to continue, because we're so focused on all the demands.
Yeah, well, I'd like to ask a little more just to clarify some of the methods of mindful practice. I think this last was a good walkthrough about that critical curiosity ability, which you said was one of the key features in mindful practice, and that walking back those catastrophizing thoughts and taking a little time to question the validity of that and instead focus on the real value of what might be happening in the present or recent past, that seems like an excellent way to go. I wanted to ask a little bit about the other piece, which was learning how to use that mindfulness muscle. And using that metaphor, do you think there is such a thing as a preferred length of the set in which you have to practice, use the muscle of meditation or mindfulness, or a minimum number of repetitions, or is there a lot of variability, that it's something that can be inserted with a great deal of flexibility, and like any muscle that's more and more used, improves over time?
I think that there are a lot of ways that mindfulness can be incorporated. If in some kind of ideal altered universe, doctors had all the time in the world, then I would say, yes, go meditate. That's the best way to practice over and over and over, kind of letting go of a thought or perhaps even a physical discomfort when you're sitting there trying to focus on your breath, letting go of it and coming back to the focal point. That practice is great, and most doctors do not have the time to do that.
Yeah.
Ron Epstein, who has brought mindfulness into the practice of medicine, jokingly says, when docs ask me about meditation, I say to them, start with 120 seconds and titrate up as tolerated. So that's one idea, is to start really small, develop a sense of efficacy, start using the muscle that perhaps hasn't been used at all. There's so many things that you can do in the course of the day that don't require, going somewhere else and adding something on when you just want to be home with your kids or perhaps just reading a quiet book. So let's talk about what a couple of those things are. One is the mindful pause. So that can be when you're turning the doorknob, going from one patient into another, and you're still thinking about that patient before you, the documentation that you still have to do, the tests that, did I get the right test, all of the concerns in your mind. And literally just taking 3 deep breaths. 3 deep breaths, just to ground yourself, to have a little bit of closure on what just was, so that you can be a little bit fresher, so that you can focus more readily with the next patient. Similarly, when your pager goes off and you're thinking, what do they want from me now? Which goes through all our minds when a pager goes off. Taking just a moment, just a pause. Why? 1, so that you can have more calm. 2, so that you don't have the same automaticity of response, which is often irritated, angry, feeling annoyed. And another part of that that's really important is we don't feel good about ourselves with any of the above. We feel much better about ourselves when we can answer in a very professional, staid fashion. So mindfulness can offer a little bit of that space. The thing that you said about taking lunch I thought was very interesting, because another part of mindfulness is inhabiting the fullness of your experience. As doctors, we tend to live from the neck up. We're very good at the cognitive, and we learn in our training to suppress everything else. And mindfulness, another aspect of it, is tuning into the entire lived experience. So the physical experience, so perhaps savoring your lunch or savoring a glass of water. The act of savoring can bring you back into the present and can help you feel like you're actually getting that sustenance again from whatever it is that you're taking into your body.
That's so interesting, Gail, because I never thought to savor a sip of water. And isn't that something? Because I have water on my desk, I need to drink it because you counsel patients quite a bit from one patient to the next. So I have to drink water, but I'm gulping, I'm not savoring. And another thing you said too is I've noticed that I'm holding my breath sometimes at my desk when I'm dictating, clicking away. And I actually have to remind myself, okay, time to take a deep breath because I was holding it for the last 30 seconds and I didn't realize it. My goodness. I feel like I don't want to be spending cognitive energy reminding myself of these things, but if I don't, then I won't breathe and I won't cherish that sip of water. I feel like I need a reorientation.
Another easy thing that people can do without going off and meditating is a little bit of reframing. So again, the idea of overwhelm. Many physicians experience overwhelm. And then we say to ourselves, I am overwhelmed, I can't stand this is miserable, etc. One easy thing is to notice when you say something like, I am overwhelmed, to shifting that to, I'm experiencing overwhelm. Distancing it a little bit. It helps you just not be quite as pulled into the what I would call the emotional vortex of overwhelm. Boy, I'm just so anxious. I don't know how I'm going to stand this. A lot of physicians are experiencing a great deal of anxiety in the course of their day. And again, just to be able to say, I'm experiencing anxiety as opposed to I am anxious, like it's not your whole being. So that's, again, part of the awareness that we're talking about with mindfulness. And the other piece that I want to get in, I know we're running out of time here, but that I think is really important. As physicians, we are often our harshest self-critic.
Yeah.
right? We say things to ourselves, we have beliefs about ourselves that we would never have about even somebody that we didn't like. And we don't really think twice about that. And one part of the awareness of mindfulness is developing a muscle of compassion for yourself as well as for others. So that's another thing that we can do in the course of our day is simply notice our own thoughts. There I go again, telling myself that I'm not as smart as Dr. X or I'm not as efficient as Dr. Y. All of those things that we say to ourselves in the course of the day. So just simply noticing that you're doing it, naming, there I go again, and trying to counter it with one self-compassionate statement. You know, yeah, Dr. X seems to be getting out early, but I don't know, I seem to be doing a really good job with my patients. And that just isn't my style. I want to spend the maximum amount of time with my patients. Or I'm working really hard today and I'm doing the best that I can. Things that, again, give you a little bit of sustenance as the day goes on, which I think is quite critical to staying afloat.
Thank you.
Very good. And my thanks to you as well, Gail. It was a really illuminating session. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure, really a pleasure, imparting some of this information.